All right. Okay, welcome everyone. It is our final installment of our HIE 101 series for Awareness Month. I'm Betsy Pilon, Executive Director of Hope for HIE, and today I'm thrilled to welcome back Dr. Mel Carrasco McCaul, and she is a wonderful child neurologist who has a huge interest in studying HIE, based out of the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And I'm so thrilled to welcome you back for HIE Awareness Month to talk about long-term cognitive impacts and what you're studying and what we know and what we hope to know and help moving forward. So Mel, welcome. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more of your background, to talk about, what got you interested in this area.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Miss Pilan. And thank you again for the opportunity. We did this like maybe almost a year ago, and it's so nice to be here. I love working with you and with Hope for HIE, so you're all the best. So what got me interested in this? I think a lot of us, so I'm an MD PhD, I'm a medical doctor, but I also have pretty significant training in child development. I love working with kids. A lot of my training was learning how kids learn through play. So I spent like a significant amount of my 20s just playing with kids in a laboratory setting and understanding how they develop different skills and just being so overjoyed by just this. It's just the kind of line of work that just makes you happy to go into work every day. Kids are just amazing. They learn so much in such a little amount of time. Those first toddler years, it's just this like rapid exponential increase in growth, and it's all through play and exploration and asking questions. And I don't know, it was great to do that. Eventually a lot of the focus of my work was with kids with autism, and eventually I happened to stumble upon HIE, and it's something that really wasn't part of my medical training curriculum early on. I didn't learn about HIE till probably into the 20 teens, so 2014 forwards, and there's no turning back. It's just a great group to work with, and it's been fun. So that's why I'm here.
Oh, wonderful. So, so you gave a little bit of this, but your interest in long-term cognitive outcomes. And typically I love to hear about this because there's been such a focus area for so many years on cerebral palsy and obviously epilepsy and things like that, because those are, I think, a lot of things that people see right away. Often in the first year, obviously HIE is the top cause of neonatal seizures. So we know that our kids are at risk of epilepsy. And we can go down that road to talk about and have many different times. But, what people really want to focus on, I think, a lot of times after you kind of figure out the cerebral palsy side, is really getting kids learning and communicating. And so can you talk a little bit more about, where we are with research in long-term cognitive impacts and development?
So you bring up some excellent points. So we know we're just beginning to scratch the surface about what we know about long-term cognitive outcomes following HIE, as well as what we call executive function outcomes. And I'm going to explain what I mean in a minute. There's a reason why we're just scratching the surface. When you think about kiddos with HIE, very resilient, they're doing so great, but one of the reasons why they're doing so well is because we finally have this therapy known as cooling therapy, therapeutic hypothermia. And this is a very recent thing. When you think about medical treatments out there for all sorts of kiddos and all sorts of patients out there, this is a pretty novel thing. It's only been around for across most of the United States. And I know we talk to also folks in different countries as well, but only in the last 2 decades has this become a thing that's widely available. So when you're thinking about cognitive outcomes, the kids that are now finally surviving HIE and making it into teenagehood and adulthood, it's just a brand new group of people who are making it out there. So we're only beginning to understand, yes, it was great that therapeutic hypothermia helped so many more of these kids survive HIE. But now that they're making it into teenagehood and adulthood, it's awesome, but we're only beginning to understand what that means for everybody. And I've always said this: HIE, if you're a kiddo with HIE, you're very resilient. You made it through quite a big something those first few days of life. And that resilience is going to carry you through for a very long time. But we also know that resilience only takes you so far. You need support, and trying to understand what it is that these kiddos needs in terms of cognitive support and executive function support. We really know very little so far. And that's what one of the things that we're trying to understand here at Wisconsin, where I'm currently located. Cognitive, so just to give a couple of broad definitions before I get too carried away, cognition are those voluntary and involuntary mechanisms in your brain that help you face everyday life, that help you learn from stimuli around you, learn from things that are being communicated to you, so that you can adapt, so you can stay safe, so you can plan your day, so you can communicate and do everything you need to do from sunrise to sunset to get through your day. We know that in kids with HIE can target some of those areas involved with cognition. So this is the reason why kids need extra support in developing these areas, particularly these cognitive processes known as executive function processes. Before I get too technical, which sometimes I do, and then I have to be brought down a couple notches. Executive functions are basically those voluntary. So I talked about cognition being this umbrella term. Involuntary, voluntary helps you perceive things and deal with everyday life. Executive functions are more down to earth, voluntary things that we can actually rehabilitate through work and play. They help us get through planning events, self-regulating our emotions. If I'm with a friend and my friend said something that's mean, I'm like, instead of getting all caught up in emotions, being able to bring it down and kind of learn from that and, move on to the next thing. They help us remember things. So these are more like low-level processes that are closer to us that we can actually rehabilitate and adapt. And again, a lot of it is housed in our brains in the frontal lobes, the temporal lobes, and we know those can be affected by HIE. So having that knowledge in hand, we know that, hey, if this is something that can be affected early on, how can we rehabilitate? And good news, bad news. We know that these things can be affected in HIE. We know that differences in executive functioning skills, you can see them as early as 6 months of age. That's what the research from our lab is beginning to show. But there's a lot of promise. Brains are really plastic. When you're a child and you have HIE, there's a lot of room to rehabilitate. That's why so much energy has gone into rehabilitating motor issues early on. My soapbox has always been this much energy can go into rehabilitating cognitive skills and the executive function skills. And the reason why is because this promotes two big things. School readiness, so getting you ready to go to school, but also making it through school. Being an active member of school who can sit through lessons. If you get frustrated, as we all do with like something that's difficult, being able to stay resilient and make it through that lesson, self-regulating when you get upset, that sort of thing. That makes you a more active member of school. It makes you more engaged in school. And it just makes it easier for you to, if you have HIE, to be able to make it through a long day of school. So these are things that we're trying to help out and just make all the better, just to like best serve our friends with HIE. So this is a very long way of me saying we have a lot to learn. We're just scratching the surface. I always talk about our friends who've done a lot of research on autism. Mm-hmm. When you look back to the early 2000s and whenever I would Google cognitive skills, autism, I would get like a handful of hits. And now you get zillions, right? There was a lot of energy, money that went into research for cognitive, and executive function stuff for autism. I think we can do the same for HIE. I remember in 2009, I happened to chance upon this great book on like how to raise a girl with autism and executive function issues. I want us to write the next how to raise the HIE girl through EF issues, how to raise the HIE boy through EF issues. And like, these are things that are common. Parents talk about it, but not enough energy has gone into them yet. And I think we're ready to do that next.
Yes.
It's a very long answer. Sorry.
No, it's perfect. I love it. I mean, and this is so timely for so many ways. And I just want to touch because autism is in the news right now a lot. And there's some things that we have learned over the past, decade plus, I think, as as we've learned so much more about HIE, as people are tracking outcomes longer and across the spectrum of HIE outcomes, and that autism, there's a really lovely paper that Dr. Stephen Lazar, who's also a child neurologist, I'm sure you probably know him, yeah.
Awesome. Yes.
Yep. And he and a group, came together and kind of more formalized, that it's not just genetic, and that, HIE for a long time, parents were told, oh, they're like autistic-like traits, right? And it's like, well, is it that, or is it just, it's autism, right? And it's just another cause of autism. And so that overlap of neurodevelopmental, delays, disabilities, differences, a lot more of our kids are now getting the diagnoses they need to get the support that they need earlier, right? So the screening, and I know this is part of your platform and soapbox and research as well, as like, let's get them in, let's get them screened, let's get interventions going for better outcomes. Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to mention that for families that are paying, that are following along and maybe catching this in the replay as well, of, when we're talking about these interventions, your child, like we know that autism diagnoses for kids, especially that have milder outcomes. So those that might not get a CP diagnosis or have a mild CP diagnosis, a lot of these things are either co-occurring or they are named for services and things like that. And that we're evolving in how we talk about HIE and the outcomes as well of what, so when you hear like all of autism is genetic, we, I think we're of the school of thought that like we need to have other non-genetic causes, which we know are underneath that bucket as well.
Absolutely. I agree. There's so much we don't know. It's kind of like one of those things, like every year there's new research. Everywhere you look, there's new things to learn. I think that's one of the things I like so much about our field, right? Like it's so collaborative. People are so open and willing to like share with each other what they've learned. We're just trying to make this a better place for everyone, right? Make it inclusive, make it open. Everybody can stand to learn and, do all the things that they want to do. So that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. And then when you talk about executive functioning, can we also talk a little bit about, and then we'll get into the question of like how you define long-term outcomes, because everyone kind of defines it differently. And that's part of the lack of consensus out there, obviously. Like in neonatology, long-term for them is like age 2 or age 3. And that's might as well be, age 25 comparatively to how you as a neurologist likely feel about long-term. But if we could talk a little bit about, timeline of when the brain kind of develops some of these things and like higher order thinking and like when, the rubber meets the road, I think for a lot of kids with executive functioning and why you're looking at intervening early is, a lot of times these things will come to a head, in elementary school. I know by 3rd grade in particular is a real critical time because we're going from, learning how to learn to actually applying the learning skills. And, I know Deanna, our program manager, comes from a teaching background. So I'm thinking of her as well. Like, she taught in a school for kids with learning disabilities and differences. And like, that pedagogy of approach for learning is very different when you have kids that have significant executive functioning impacts. So if you go from the science side of like, helping us understand like what the timing of some of this looks like of, when different things are expected of kids along that way, I think that'd be really helpful.
Absolutely. So I always like to think about, how like when you have a kiddo and you take them to the pediatrician, they always have this like poster with like, these are the milestones that your kid should be heading for the motor things. Like they should be sitting unsupported by 9 months. They should be walking by 18 to 24 months. Wouldn't it be nice if we had the same poster for cognitive milestones? We really don't. We have a lot of research that we could start piecing this together. But again, we're not quite there yet. My group is getting ready to publish something like along those lines in the next year. So hope we'll get there as soon as we can. A lot of people ask why it is so hard to have the equivalent. So motor outcomes are very easy to track, right? You just observe the child. You learn by just observing and working with them, like as a physical therapist, as a neurologist, what have you. Cognitive skills, again, it takes extra training to get a sense of where the child is at. it's not like you can give a child a multiple choice questionnaire and get a sense of like, oh, this is where your cognitive, level is at this point. It's just one of those things that takes more time and energy and nuance to tease apart. But I do think in the next couple of years, we can have a similar timeline. Usually the things that I'm asking my parents for is like between ages 6 and 9 months old, is the kid vocalizing, showing an interest in social interaction? More than anything, because we know that if a child is socially in tune with the world around him or her, that means that he or she is going to be very motivated to learn. They want to like fit in with everybody around them. They want to communicate with that mom and dad. If they're not interested by 6 to 9 months, maybe even earlier, actually, I would say, but we know that these kids are complex. They have other medical issues that could get in the way. I try to say by 6 to 9 months old, is that piece in place? Are they vocalizing? Are they interacting? Do we feel there's a social component to things? Are they babbling and gesturing by 9 months of age? Are they starting to pay attention to things? And one of the things that we've seen in my lab is that even as early as 6 months of age, the levels of attention for even playful toys are different between kiddos with HIE and typically developing kiddos. This is one thing about me. I always use quotation marks when I say typical. Who's typical? Everybody's different. We're also neurodiverse. So, but we all in the scientific world would define typical in a very standardized way. But when you compare HIE kiddos with kids that did not have HIE, I should say, we already see differences in attention. They're paying less attention to things that are toys that you think would be as very enticing for them. There's lots of questions as to why that is, even in the absence of visual impairment. Mm-hmm. So already those attentional networks that help you cue into novel stimuli, to things that you'd want your child to play with and engage with, they're a little bit lagging behind. So how do we catch up these kiddos to be up to speed? The way we assess this is with something known as the puppet task. I swear when you walk into my lab, I'm not just holding a puppet and waving it at kids. And there's like scientific rigorous experiments going on. But this is a fun test where we show the same puppet over and over again. And over time, you think that kids would pay attention, a lot of attention, because it's a cool new puppet. But over time, get bored of the puppet and not care for it so much, and then move on to a new toy. And we do see that with some of our kiddos with HIE, they not pay attention to begin with. And by the time they latch on, it's almost like they cannot latch off and move on to a new stimulus as efficiently as kiddos without HIE. So that already it opens up all sorts of questions like, what is it about their attention that's a little different? Why are they latching on to this stimulus and not moving on to learn new things? If they're not latching off as quickly, what are they missing out of when they could have been learning about new toys and new interactions and new opportunities? So again, these are all just very early questions we have. I think the big picture that we need to focus on is already at that 6 to 9 month old level, we're seeing differences. Let's think of ways to rehabilitate them. And I think we have some good ideas on how to do that. And that early research will help inform the intervention. So yeah.
That's amazing, because currently, what do we have for interventions? I know I don't know if this is skipping ahead or if I didn't even include this, but
you did. So we right now do not have an intervention for cognitive rehabilitation that's meant to be just for kids with HIE or just for kids with early neurological histories, is what I like to call it. So I'm thinking not just HIE, but more broadly for kiddos who have other things that happen early in life that confer a neurological risk for cognitive disability. So we don't have anything specific for either set of populations, which blows my mind, right? How is it that we got so far and we still don't have anything? And there's many reasons why. There's always been interest, but again, it's only till very recent that we've been able to get these kids to survive long term, right? Now that we have cooling in place, now that we have better motor therapies in place, we can have a cohort of kiddos that are able to participate in these cognitive interventions. My group has been working to adapt something known as the Abecedarian approach. Many people out there may know it as the Carolina Project. This is a cognitive and language intervention that has been around since the 70s. It was first created for kids at risk growing up in low SES, poor backgrounds. It has a ton of empirical support behind it. And in the late 80s, it was trialed in a group of children with cerebral palsy and was found to have amazing success in terms of that cognitive rehab piece. And then nothing happened till 2022. And a lot of people wonder why that is. The key to success for this intervention, it boils down to sessions that happen usually every other week, one-on-one with an interventionalist. So two things happened. If you don't happen to live by a center that offers this, you're going to miss out on this intervention opportunity. So that's no good, right? Second thing is insurance doesn't always cover this kind of thing. And that's just something that we need to keep advocating for and working on. To try to bypass some of these issues, I proposed, I think it was in 2022, 2023, why don't we take this in-person intervention, which takes a lot of resources to pull off. You would need a coach in person, working with the kid one-on-one. This is a lot of resources that you need to pull for this. Why don't we convert this into a virtual intervention where you could have a coach meeting with a family one-on-one virtually? That removes the accessibility barrier. So a lot of families just don't, they already have a million PTOT speech appointments, medical appointments to drive to. This was one thing where they wouldn't have to drive through. They can do this from home. They can learn the basics, and then they can keep practicing on their own with support from a coach from afar who would help with this sort of thing. And that's what we're trying to trial right now. It's the virtual, we call it, instead of a Besidarian approach, I call it virtual A squared. Mostly because sometimes when I'm tired, it's hard to say the whole Episodian approach is long term, and I think it's going to help everybody. But yeah, so we're just trying to do this online. It boils down to, again, like I said, every other week, 30-minute sessions, play based. So you're learning through play because that's the way kids learn best. A lot of it is just teaching the parent what to do, and then they get 2 weeks to practice with the kiddo. And every session, you're meant to walk away with, okay, I'm teaching my kid this game, but why am I teaching my kid this game? It's because it's going to focus on attention on this one executive function piece, on this one particular language piece. So again, everything's meant to be very high level gaming where the parent will feel also that, okay, I am doing this and this is the reason why. So we're not just coaching the child, we're also coaching the parent to be in tune for these attentional differences, these executive function differences. So this, when you do the in-person approach, it has led to kids having better school readiness, better school engagement, better long-term outcomes in terms of independence once they hit adulthood and all the different things. We want to see if we can achieve the same with the virtual method. And that's why we're hosting a clinical trial for this, just to see if it's even feasible. We want to make sure that this is accessible to all. So we'll see how it all goes.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what is the inclusion criteria for your study?
So right now we have 2 arms. We have an arm for kiddos with HIE. We're going to have a feasibility trial where, again, we just want to know if this is feasible to do on the internet, as they call it. So anybody with an HIE diagnosis 6 to 24 months of age is eligible to be involved. I have some contact info. They can just email us. There's a QR code in our flyer. Somebody, Gen Z, created the QR code for me. It wasn't me. Couldn't figure it out. But there are easy ways to reach us. If you're interested and you have a child with HIE or a grandchild or somebody you'd love to enroll, you would like to be considered, just send us a message. Families can reach out to us. And then we can walk you through the eligibility, but we're keeping it pretty open. It's HIE, 6 to 24 months for the feasibility trial. We will go through a consenting process. We have a meeting with the parent or the caregiver, where we go over consents and trying to figure out how we can get all this information and all of this put in place. We want this to be, again, the word feasible. It's a word that I keep saying. I don't want this to be yet another burden on a parent's plate. We already, as parents, are juggling way too much. We're trying to make this easy, so we'll work with families to make sure that this is doable. Because again, if it's not something that's doable and sustainable, it's not going to help anybody long term. So that's what we're trying to do. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And so when you say that anyone with internet, so you really mean that anyone in our global community could participate in this?
Absolutely. That's the plan. We do have a system in place where we would get the parents' permission to share some medical chart information because one of the questions we have is who is squared going to benefit the most? We think it's going to benefit everybody, but we want to make sure. Is this one of those things that will be best for mild to moderate HIE versus moderate to severe? Are there ways to tweak the curriculum where, okay, this is the curriculum for mild to moderate versus moderate to severe, that sort of thing. We're trying to be very specific about these sorts of things. So if parents are open and willing to share, we would appreciate this information and we'll work with them to make sure this is easy for them to be able to get us this information. Yeah.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my other questions is like accessibility. Because when we talk about, like especially that first year, where kids with HIE are, at risk for visual impairments and, all these things of like wondering what the delay is. Is it because of visual? Is it because of cognitive? Is it both? Is it, physical? And then looking at how do you make these things accessible across that spectrum of outcomes? Because I know that's always tricky when it comes to like standardized anything.
Right? Yeah, it's one of the things that we spent the last 2 years just translating for our HIE kiddos, the whole intervention. And it's taken, we have the whole virtual A² team. There's somebody from the School of Education at UW, somebody from the School of Psychology. We have some consultants from the original A² group, because we really just wanted to make sure, there's a lot of data to support A² in general for at-risk kids, but translating it so it actually makes sense for HIE took 2 years to do. And it took a lot of really good people. I helped with what I could, but I know what I'm good at. I'm good at the cognitive neuroscience part. There were a lot of people involved in making sure that this was something that was applicable for HIE. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is real cutting edge stuff. So for families that are like, that have been through, my kid is now 13, and so, I didn't learn about executive functioning issues as part of cognition until, he was a couple of years old. And, like our neurologist would say like, oh, I think he's going to have ADHD because of his attention during clinical exams. But it was really tough to weren't like a lot of tests, like there's the Bailey 2 or the Bailey 3 or whatever it is. And it's very limited on what it, on what it shows. And I think that's been a real gap, as and what you're trying to solve this gap for our community. And just really, really exciting to hear about that this is accessible to our global community to participate in, and the inclusion of 6 months to 24 months. And we will make sure that this is something that we share out with this, broadcast, with our key takeaways, and on our clinical trials hub, which is hopeforhie.org/clinical trials. And so, with more of what you said, the QR code and email and all the ways that you can sign up for this for families to learn more about how they can sign up and learn more about the study. And so how will you be communicating about the status of like enrollment and, the findings along the way?
Everything's done by email. We will have a quarterly newsletter where we'll be like, we've made it to these many enrolled families and this is what we're learning. So that's one. The newsletter is going to be big. Families, again, I am very aware that everybody's so busy, but families will be receiving surveys so they can tell us their honest truth. Like, how do they feel about virtual A²? Is this helping? Do these games make sense? Do they feel like they're getting something out of it? So on and so forth. So that's the family opinion kind of like piece is going to be very important. We're going to be hosting focus groups every 3 to 6 months as well over the course of the clinical trial. These are all paid opportunities. So I want to make sure that families know that we do value their time. So they will be reimbursed for their time, which we really appreciate, and for their expertise. Nobody should feel like they're giving away this expertise for free. We really value it. So we really are very lucky to have grant funding to help support us in this endeavor. But the goal will be every 3 to 6 months, if interested. Just because you're participating in virtual A² doesn't mean you have to do the extra focus groups. But for parents who want to give a little extra bit of their time, they're going to be invited to focus groups for every 3 to 6 months, as I mentioned, for 90 minutes, where we're just going to have one of our research assistants as well as our speech therapist just walking them through, okay, virtual A², what has your child learned? Where can we improve? What can we do better? Really, we want to come from a place, and I feel like, again, we've talked a lot about the autism community and why they've done so well. They did something very similar. Engaging family voice from the get-go was, or not the get-go, I should say, early enough where they've gone, it's gone well. I shouldn't say the get-go 1950s. Those were dark times. But now, I feel like involving the parent voice to give us just honest feedback. Does this make sense? Does this not make sense? It's going to help a ton. So those are the opportunities. We'll have the newsletter to keep everybody abreast on things. Families will have the opportunity to bring their child in for assessment, for formalized cognitive assessment once a year. It would start 1 year after their child is enrolled. So they would get actual objective data on cognitive issues, like how is their child doing? They can take that to a pediatrician. They can take that to their school once the child is old enough. So this is information they would have to hold for themselves. And then, as I mentioned, the focus groups will be helpful. So, yeah.
For sure. Great. And so is there anything else that you want to let us know about the study, or, where you are, that we have a parent commenting saying that virtual help fill in the gaps and that their local health department can only provide one time due to a lack of staff, which I think we're seeing in a lot of areas. And, again, like in how programs are set up for follow-up or neurodevelopment and early intervention in particular varies even in the same state where you might be, or the same county.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I think it's going to help by making this a virtual based thing. Eventually, because we're thinking big, if we get good results and we feel like this is really helping our families, the goal would be to then partner with early intervention groups across the country. In Wisconsin, it's known as Birth to 3. Back in Maryland, I think every state has their own name for it. But the goal would be to partner with them if they're interested to make this part of their curriculum and make this something that's easy to just integrate into their workflows. But first, we need to show that it helps, that it works. But I'm hopeful by making this virtual, easy, digestible, it will be something that it can be integrated in the future. Yeah.
Wonderful. That's so great. So I guess, the next question is, what are your hopes for the future of what we can do? I mean, I'm sure it's related to improving the outcomes of kids with HIE, but also any of your favorite resources for families that encourage cognitive development, across the years.
Yeah, for resources, there's a lot of really good stuff out there. None of it is HIE specific, but I think we can take some of these resources and maybe tailor it to one particular child. I think that's doable. Harvard has a Center for the Developing Child. They have an executive function page that's full of really good tidbits and things that you can use. So that one's really good. Center for the Mind, I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly, is also very good. And then, I recently came across this amazing group, understood.org, and I actually spent the week. Are you familiar with them?
They're one of my favorite resources, yes.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry. It's one of those things that the internet is so huge, and I keep discovering things. So sometimes they're spooky things, but sometimes you stumble upon something amazing. It's a fantastic resource. I actually spent way too much of my time this weekend looking at it. They have some great stuff in there. I would really highly encourage all our families to take a look because they have some really good tips and things you can work through. So that's great. I'm so glad to hear from you that you've seen it before. This is so wonderful. And then my hope for the future, coming from a little bit of a personal story, I think a lot of focus on our children is on school readiness. I really want us to aim for a world where school engagement, positive school engagement, and giving kids the resources and the whatever they need to not just make it into school, but to thrive at school. That doesn't mean that every kid has to be an honor roll A+ student. That's not the goal. It means that every kid goes in there and finds their people and finds their community and has the skills to sit down, pay attention, and self-regulate and make the most out of it. I think that's what I want. I think that's what I would have wanted for myself when I was a kid, right? We're all near spicy, as I like to call it. So I just want to make sure that's something that we're working towards. And I think we've come a long way. But I think there's still a lot to do. that's kind of like where I am right now. Yeah.
I love that. That is such a wonderful mission, I think, to all work together towards, and definitely resonates, I know, with our families of school-aged kids, and those that are preparing, and that transition is so tough in between, especially, when we talk about US based, and it can apply around the world, but the current model for US stuff in particular is this like 0 to 3 early intervention model, right? So it's very like strength based and proactive, and then you're on a cliff for a lot of people transitioning, and it's a short transition period of like 3 to 5 where it's like you're in it for a moment, right? And then it changes to a deficit based model for qualifying for services and all the things. And then you transition again. It's like this, herky jerky time of going, into K to 12. And, the expectations for kids now are so much greater, I feel like, than, they're like, in that pressure for families, that pressure for kids is so tough. And if you have any sort of difference, you just feel that, exponentially. So I agree, the focus on like anchoring kids in their strengths, finding their people, finding their passion, and that's just been such a journey, for, I know, so many of our families, as, just, I think, for what you're talking about, that play-based approach, that multisensory approach, and how our kids can really benefit and grow with that.
That's my hope. I really think we can achieve it. I think we're close, honestly, where we've made it. So there you go. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm very hopeful for things. Yeah.
I love it. Well, this has been so wonderful to, welcome you back and talk a little bit more about long-term outcomes and cognition and all the work that you're undertaking. Again, we're so excited to share more about your study. We'll be, sharing out the recruitment materials across our social media, across our Facebook groups, and our clinical trial hub, so people can learn more about enrolling, and we'll be checking in with you on updates, as they come along as well. And just want to thank you so much for your continued enthusiasm and commitment to our community. It really, I know for our families, it can feel a lot like we are not, I don't know, sometimes HIE feels like an afterthought out there, and I think for our families, I'm always inspired and encouraged when talking to folks like yourself this is like your passion, the passion behind this, for our community is just amazing to hear and to experience and to hopefully be a part of. Someone did ask what the website you recommended again to check out, and that is understood.org. And we'll put that in our key takeaways as well. And we have some, additional ones that we'll share out as with this. I think you might have been referring to Child Mind Institute. That's another one that is very robust. And again, I learned of these first when I worked for the same school that Deanna did. So not at the same time. So, and that has, that opened my world as well. Now that I have a 13-year-old that has some, attention stuff, and looking at, especially understood.org has just a ton of really good information about like IEP goals and supports for specific, areas of focus, whether it's dyslexia or attention. I know you were digging in, and like, they've done a lot of work and a lot of resources. They have webinars, they have all sorts of things. So it's really amazing when we don't have to recreate the wheel when the wheel's already there. We can just direct people to it. So.
I know. I feel like one of the moms that I was talking to last week, she's like, I feel like I need a PhD just to understand all the language, the lingo, the terms that come with raising my kid with HIE. And I'm like, yes, but also go to these really good websites because they will help you. You shouldn't feel like you're starting from scratch. They have some really good information out there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's overwhelming though. Yeah.
It is overwhelming. Yes. Yes. And those early, and one of the ones that I love too, that I want to share before we go, is pathways.org. And that's another one that they focus on every single neurodevelopmental domain, and early on too. So they, they're talking about how you can stimulate your kids' cognition and learning from like 0 to 6 months and, onward. So, and across, if your child has some different physical disabilities and kind of adapting that. So there are some really good, accessible resources. Pathways also is available in many different languages. So first language availability, for people that might not have English as their first language, which I think is really important too.
Yeah. I totally forgot about them, and I feel bad that I did, because they're
not
fantastic.
at all.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, they're amazing.
There's so many resources and so many things to talk about.
I know. Yeah. I love it. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you again, Mel, for joining us today for another Q&A, sharing about your research and the state of where we are with all the different non-CP and epilepsy impacts, which is such a huge, important focus area. And we look forward to hearing more from you in the future. And thanks everyone for tuning in today. This will again be on replay on our available as an evergreen resource on our social media, on our YouTube channel. Deanna always creates these key takeaways on our blog and our social as well. So all these resources will be available for you. And the study information will be up again on hopeforhie.org/clinical-trials. All right. Have a great day, everyone. We're closing out HIE Awareness Month. So it's been a wonderful month always of learning and seeing exciting new things going on. And we thank you all for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.